So I'm out here and I'm listening, and I don't have, maybe I do have field management software, but I'm not using it, to track customers and so on. How do I start? I mean, for me, well, it doesn't matter for me, but evaluating a bunch of different softwares just drives me nuts. Some people like they do it like eating popcorn.
Yeah.
But how would you start?
Well, at first, one, I think it's great to ask people in your industry, hey, what are you using? Um, don't necessarily just take that for what it is and start following exactly what they do because they may not be doing it the best necessarily. Um, and it could be a competitive advantage for you to be operationally excellent and maybe they're not. And so if you just follow them, then you're not becoming operationally excellent because they're using a poor software choice. But I think the way that I would start to think about it is what are the features that we absolutely need and what are the functions of our business? And I'd start by just kind of mapping out our process. You can go back and listen to the process mapping episode if you haven't already. But I'd map out our process to understand, okay, from the first time that we interact with a customer, maybe it's they fill out a form on our website or they gave us a phone call or we knocked on their door, whatever it is, what are all of the stages that we go through to where we've now received a Google review from that person. So everything from we had that first interaction, we had a phone call, we met in person, we did a job walk together, we looked at how much the job was going to cost internally, we went to the supplier to gather materials list, we sent over a quote, we got a signature from them, we received a deposit, we went and got them on the schedule, we delivered the materials, we did the work, we paid the subs that we had on the job, and then we got the final invoice collected from them. We sent a thank you note. We got a Google review from them, and we have a follow-up in 6 months to get their service scheduled for maintenance for next year, right? Something along those lines. But you should have this very drawn out and be detailed. It's okay if there's 50 steps, right? It's okay if there's 10 steps, but just be detailed and think through every aspect. And then start to think through what are all the things that would be helpful as we go through that. It's going to be helpful to have their contact information. Okay, a CRM does that because we're going to have to touch base with them on multiple fronts. And it's probably going to be a variety of people on our team that are going to have to touch base with them. So we need to have their contact information and it needs to be accessible. Okay, a CRM does that. All right, we're going to need to know who the subs are on this. Oh, okay, so we're going to have, companies that can be tracked as well to this. We're going to have to do sales, and we need to track how the sales process goes from have we sent the proposal, have we not? Okay, so maybe a deals sales pipeline function would be helpful for this. All right, we need to be able to track our materials so that we know exactly what needs to be ordered and when it needs to be ordered. Okay, interesting. Should we be using a software like Buildertrend where we can build our material list pretty easily? Maybe. Or maybe that's something that we don't necessarily need in the software. We can just have our own internal sheet that's more of a checklist because it's the same materials over and over and over, and it's not very custom. So maybe we just have that as an attachment, right? And just start to think through all these different aspects. And then from there, knowing who you are and what you need as a company, prioritize those needs. What is the most important to you and what's the least important? Maybe that material lease is kind of further down the line. Maybe a scheduling aspect is further down the line. And then you can go and find the software. And yeah, sure, think a little bit long term, but then think more about the next year and what's actually feasible for you guys to start working on and tracking and following. We talked before the episode. I don't know how I found this, but Chekhov's principle
Yeah,
for stories,
check off gun
Chekhov's gun
principle.
principle. And
Yeah,
basically the principle is that like, if you're telling a story, if you mention something, it needs to come back up later. If you mention a gun in the first act of the story, then the gun needs to be brought up again by the third act. And the idea is there that you don't want to have unnecessary details in your story because then you lose the audience that you're telling the story to. And I believe that applies to your software, to your processes, that if you mention something, if you're tracking something, if you are using a feature, it needs to be used by people throughout the process. And if it's not being used, you need to cut it out. And the reality is, with all these features that you could potentially use, you are going to have to cut them out yourself rather than relying on the software to cut them out. Right. And just recognize, hey, I only need right now, like you mentioned, contacts, email, tiles, as you called it, tickets or cards, whatever you want to call it, for tracking your deals and your production. And then you wanted tasks. So a task manager. And that's pretty basic. And I think
Yeah,
that's fairly standard, but just recognize that's going to take time. Like managing your tasks on software is a huge hurdle for people. Most people are just using paper and pencil, and that's great. It's effective. There's a lot of value in managing it through software, but that's a hurdle behavior change wise to get people to use the software, especially when they're out in the field or they're very rarely at a computer. So just something to think about.
Well, yeah, I think the idea, I mean, go back to the principle of one place to look. You do have behavioral changes, but and you have to cause the changes to happen. And one of the ways to do that is, what am I supposed to be doing? Look in the software. It's all in the software. And it makes changes over time. But if it's simple, I mean, just in talking with my clients about all the things that are in these apps that they use, do you need that? That's Chekhov's gun. Do you really need that?
Yeah.
Well, I want to invoice through my iPad out at the job. Why? What benefit is there? Well, it's done. So you got your form and billing or not billing. You have another process. Anyway, it frustrates me. And that's why I'm after finding a simple, compact CRM that we could just call it a CRM, not field management, that just does those basic functions of keeping track of my customers, keeping track of tasks. I mean, I need to call this guy. That's the same as emailing yourself a reminder. Keeping track of where they are in the sales process and the job process through the tiles, through the what do you call them? I keep calling them tiles.
Cards. It's really a Kanban card system is the technical term.
Kanban. Yeah.
No. And I will say, if you are managing a field crew, you're doing service and you're like residential service, you're a plumber, you should have the ability to bill through an iPad because that's going to keep your receivables down. It's going to make sure that you're charging on when the work is done, which is much easier for the customer to pay because they realize, oh, wow, you just did this work. Yeah, I need to pay you, rather than getting a bill 3 days later because you're invoicing late. And that's maybe even gracious for some people 3 days later. And then they're like, oh, we don't have to pay this just yet. And they forget about it, whatever. So there's value in a lot of these features and they exist for a reason, but do they actually apply to you? And are you actually ready to do that? And is it a necessity for where you stand today? That's something for you to answer. I think, we talk about the impact that knowing your numbers will make in your business and knowing your customers and knowing everything that revolves around them and having the information organized, accessible, and presented in a meaningful way to you will change how you do things. It'll change how you sell. It'll change how you manage projects. It'll change everything about how you interact with the customers in your company. And at the end of the day, when you know your customers intimately, you're able to really differentiate yourself from others. So, yeah. Any other questions you have around CRMs, Martin?
Well, no, I think that's pretty good. As I said, I just like the simple ones. HubSpot's that way. I don't have people that are so concerned with it being free. They don't want to spend a couple of $1,000 a month on something that they're not really using, but just something that works, is intuitive, and covers those elements. And the good thing about HubSpot is if you really branch out and start doing drip marketing, it can handle it.
Yeah. I mean, there's Fortune 500 companies that use HubSpot for not just CRM, but all of their sales functions. They have their website built in there. They use it for their customer support. They use it for all of their marketing. So there's a variety of functions that you can do inside of HubSpot, but there's great CRMs that aren't HubSpot.